everyone, welcome back to JP's Budget Collecting and our weekly look back at the hot comics from 6 months ago. This week we're looking back at the hot comics from November 18th, 2022, and I'm recording this a little bit early, recording this on May 16th, 2023. As always, I give you those dates so you know when this information is actually relevant because the market is always moving and changing. And since I'm recording it earlier in the week, something may even happen this week before you see this video that has changed these prices. But as of now, all this information is accurate. As always, we're looking back at the CBSI Hot Top 10 and the Comic Tom Key Collector Hottest Trending Comics of the Week. Those are the two lists I've been using now for 4+ years to kind of evaluate, okay, what books were hot, what factors made them hot, what has happened to them in the 6 months after they were hot. Did they hold steady? Did they continue to climb? Did they drop back? If you've been watching this show for any length of time, you know that the patience is the key here because most of these books do drop back. This week we got 17 books to talk about. So let's dig into this list and see what we can learn this week. First up, we have DC Pride #1 from 2022. And this hit the list because there is basically a biographical story written by Kevin Conroy in this issue, and with his passing last fall, people were kind of jumping on this book, were grabbing it. Raw copies back then were $5 to $20, not huge value, but a little bit of value. 9.8 went for $60. Now it's like $5 to $12 kind of range. 9.8, 40-ish bucks. So definitely a down, and I'll be back. Kind of, there's a little value here, but as generally happens, once we move away from an event like that, after some time, after an artist or writer, or in this case, a voice actor or just actor passes away, the books usually come back. That's what's happened here. Next, we have Gru the Wanderer #7, the first appearance of Chuckle. I'll be honest, I don't know anything about the series or these characters, but there's long been rumors of an animated movie coming. I don't know, even back then, they weren't really sure what was going on that caused this book to jump, but 9.8 hit 220, so that's what put this on the list. Now, a 9.8 is 140 to 200, so it's backed up a little bit. Raw copies are 10 to 20 bucks on this book. If you're a Gru the Wanderer fan, that doesn't seem all that bad, but definitely a down, and I'll be back, and was worth waiting for whatever caused this buzz, if there was new information or what, to quiet down. You can do just a little bit better. And with that, we're going to move into covers. We have only 4 covers this week to talk about. We have Garbage Pail Kids, Origins #2, the Clayton Crane variant that was limited to 200. This was a little bit of a controversial book. It was basically, people thought it was him taking shots at his critics because of all the stuff that went down with Black Flag and everything else, and that he was taking some shots here with this cover. Caused it right out of the gate to jump to $140 to $150 book for a raw copy. Now, there's only been one recent sale. It went for $130. There's not a ton of these listed because there's only 200 of them, period. But they're all in this range, and they're not really selling. So we're down, and I'll be back here. Boy, you could almost argue a trap, but that $130 sale keeps me from saying that. But my guess is that's probably more than anybody else is going to get for this book, at least anytime soon. But definitely, and I'll be back on this one for sure. Next, we have Sonic the Hedgehog Tails 30th Anniversary Special, #1, the Tracy Yardley 1 in 10 variant. This 1 in 10 was going for 15 to 25 right out of the gate. This is one of several Sonic books we've had hit the list over the last year or so. And yeah, this one hit the list, 15 to 25 out of the gate. And now it's still 18 to 25. The lowest recent sale was $18. So this is definitely kind of a steady worth it. It's on the upper end of that scale. Hasn't really went up, but all the sales are on the upper end of the scale of what it was back then. So this one has definitely bucked the trend. Of course, it wasn't going for all that much to start with, but it has held very steady, and definitely, like, if you bought it back then, it's no different than if you bought it today, in terms of what it would cost you. Next, we have Blade Vampire Nation, #1, the Gabriel Del Otto 1 in 25. This was going for 25 to 50 bucks back then. So basically, ratio to double. That's usually not a good sign. It usually means it's going to end up below ratio, and that is what's happened here. It's now a $15 to $28 book, so there is one sale over 25 and a couple sales at 25, but definitely it's backed up to ratio or below. 9.8 did go for 200, but that's only one sale, so I don't know that it would sustain that on the regular. So yeah, this definitely turned into a down and a trap on this Blade book, as it's definitely backed up to below ratio, which is not surprising given where the prices were, even when it was hot. Next, we have Star Wars Hidden Empire #1, the Art Adams 1 in 50 Darth Maul cover. Back this one was only going 50 to 60, so ratio to slightly above. That's not a good sign for a ratio book. Now it's a $20 to $45 book. 9.8 only costs you 80 to 115. This is another trap and another very predictable based on where it was selling for that ratio value, what it was going to do 6 months later. All right, next we have Incredible Hulk 377, the hard to find third print of the first appearance of Professor Hulk. Back then a 9.8 went for $3,000, which this one sale prompted it to be on the list. It was like a huge increase from the previous 9.8 sale, like a 50% increase, I guess. That was back in 2020. So that is, so that's why they were putting it on the list. A big all-time high here. No, that is still the most recent 9.8 sale of this book. There's not many of those out there, and there has not been a sale since. Now it's a 150 to 250 on a raw side. 9.6 will cost you about just under $1,000. Its most recent sale was $970. So don't have any data to go off of. Obviously back then, for some reason, I didn't look up what raws were going for as well. I'm going to call this steady and worth it. My guess is a 9.8 come in. It's probably going to go for that or maybe even more. You say, well, 9.6 only $1,000, but a third of the price for 9.6 is not that unusual, particularly on a book that's hard to get in a 9.8. I would guess this is definitely steady and worth it. Next, we got Amazing Spider-Man #799, the first appearance of Normie as Goblin Child or Red Goblin or whatever, that Norman had turned his grandson into another goblin. This is the second print. Back then, the second print was going for 15 to 20, 9.8 going for 87. Now, raw copies are 20 to 25. Well, I should say 20 and 25. So that would be up worth it, right? But 9.8 sales, there's been two of those as well. 25 and 35. Well, that's definitely a trap, borderline dumpster fire compared to $90 for 9.8. So what do you do with this? I'm calling it down and a trap. I don't know how it's sustaining. There's been a couple of sales, but for the most part, there just hasn't been sales on those raw copies that they're asking that much for. To me, that tells me that even though a couple of people bought the bullet and bought it, it's probably not really worth that much. 9.8 going for super cheap when people basically put them up for auction or whatever. It tells me more of a better guide of what's going on with this book. So that's why we're going to call this a trap. Definitely hard to judge. We have this few sales, but clearly appears to be down for sure. Next, we have Omega Man #3 on the list for the third week in a row, because after everybody speculated that James Gunn is going to use Lobo when he got announced, then he kind of trolled us all by putting made an Instagram or Twitter post that just had a picture of Lobo, so everybody continued to jump on it. But really, this is the same price as it was last week. When we talked about raw copies, are around 100. 9.8 going for 360. That's almost exactly what it was doing the previous week when we talked about it. And so, it's the same situation. Down and I'll be back, because raw copies now are 50 to 100. 9.8, recent 9.8s, 340, 360. So you can say pretty steady on the 9.8s. But the raw copies are far enough under 100. We'll just go with a down, and I'll be back overall on Omega Man 3. But a lot of value here. I think a lot of people still believe that we're going to get some form of Lobo once James Gunn's version of the DC movie universe officially gets going. We will see. All right, next we have Spectre #54, the first appearance of the second Mr. Terrific, Michael Holt. And this is another character James Gunn had kind of hinted at back then that caused it to hit the list. $50 to $100 for raw sales on this one back then. 9.8 going for $300. Now it's a $40 to $125. So that's a steady on a raw side. But 9.8s now are going, and this is multiple sales, 500 plus, all the way up to 625 for a sale. That's straight cash on a 9.8, so that's what we're going to call it here. Even though more sales are the raw side, not a lot of. I think this book is fairly hard to find. Not in terms of like extremely rare, but it is not a super common book. And yeah, it's going for big money. People are still paying big money for this. Color me surprised. I did not think this character would hold this kind of value, but it did. All right. With that, we're moving away from DC. We're moving into Sony Spiders. And this is basically Amazing Spider-Man number 4, the first appearance of Silk. And we got some updates on the show that they've supposed to be working on for years and years and years. That was going to Amazon Prime International, but you'd have to have MGM Plus in the US. And that kind of actually caused people to like take a damper on it, but it still caused the book to hit the list. It jumped a little bit. 9.8s back then were back up to 250 to 300, which was still down from the all-time highs, but up a little bit over what it had been steady at, and now it's back to what it had been steady at, 175 to 225. That right around that $200 range seems to be where this book sits most of the time with no news. $80 to $100 for raw copies still. So yeah, this one's definitely, technically you go 250, 300 down to 175. You're talking a 275 average down to a 200 average. That's a trap. And so that's where we put it, but it's really back to where it kind of stays. All right, with that, we're moving into MCU stuff completely. And we got Spider-Woman number 5 from 1978, the first modern appearance of Morgan Le Fay, who, this is the rumor, who Aubrey Plaza is going to be in the Agatha show back then. I don't know if we've gotten an update on this or not, on who we think she's going to be. But that's what was causing this book to hit the list back then. Raw copies were averaging $15. 9.8 went for all of 45. And this book is up in terms of that. 9.8 now are 1 to 150, which is, probably a known key. I think people still think this is going to happen. Raw copies 5 to 25, with most of the sales more on the higher end of that. Back then I called it worth it. I'm going to go with up and worth it, not up and straight cash. I feel like the vast majority of the sales are the raw side, and they're definitely kind of slightly up, worth it, but those 9.8s, it was so low that there was just so few 9.8 sales. That $45 was probably most even before the news was out. So that's where we're going to go with this one, but definitely up on this book. All right, next we have White Tiger number 1, the first appearance of Angela Del Toro as White Tiger. This is the 4th White Tiger, but there was rumors Jenna Ortega was going to be this version, that she was getting cast. I don't think we've heard anything more about this, or if anything, this maybe has been debunked since then. But back then, prices were 20 to 30 for a raw copy. 9.8 was going 300. And this is another one where it's really hard to say what's going on with the book. Raw copies now are 12 to 50. Like, all over the place on raw copies, although most of them are at or above kind of that old range, so that would be up, right? Up worth it, or up straight cash. But 9.8s, which were going for 300 back then, are 150 to 200, so that's down. That's a trap. So what do you do with this? I wrote down steady and I'll be back. That's the category I put it in. But clearly you occasionally get these where the 9.8s get maybe overvalued, and maybe the raw copies are still a little undervalued, and they both kind of move into a position more appropriate to where they should be. That seems to be what's happened here. The raw copies hadn't quite caught up with the interest, but the 9.8s, because there wasn't a ton of them, jumped to too high a price back then, and they settled at a more reasonable price for this book. So put this as a steady and I'll be back, but it really doesn't fit in that category. It's just that the book, both ends of the book have adjusted more appropriately to the market to be the right range apart here. We've now got several 9.8s on the market compared to what it was back then. That's caused the 9.8 prices to come down. But the raw prices are continuing to drive it. There's still interest here on the raw side, so that price is actually steady or slightly up. So next, we have Black Panther number 3, the first appearance of Tosin. This is still in the aftermath of the Black Panther movie coming out. People were still, even though the character is clearly not Tosin, people were still kind of hoping. And this is the second week in a row here for this book as well. Raw copies 35, 9.8, 185. Now it's a $25 to $60 book on the raw side, which you could say, again, pretty steady, maybe slightly up here, maybe worth it for sure. But the 9.8s are now 90 to 150. That's a down, and I'll be back. And there's actually enough people have slabbed this book that there's almost as many 9.8 sales as there are raw sales. So we went on and put this as a down, and I'll be back on that front. Next, we have Namor #1 from 1990. This is the first issue of his 6th solo series. I'm not real sure why people were going for this #1 with all the other Namor books that you could chase, but apparently like a super affordable one that people were just buying. Raw copies back then were still only up to $10. There's a lot of these. It's not an expensive book. 9.8s were going $150. And this is now $1. There were a couple sales up near $10, but most part it's like $1, $2, $3 book. 9.8's $90 to $110. So yeah, this is down in a trap. There's just not a lot of value here. This is a fairly highly printed book, and it's not really much of a Namor key. I mean, let's be honest. All right, 2 books left. 2 of the main characters in the Black Panther movie. Well, obviously Namor was, but 2 of the others. We got Invincible Iron Man #9, the first full appearance of Riri Williams. Basically, back then raw copies were going for $40 to $100, 9.8's $250 to $400, which is still well down from the peaks this book had prior to the movie. But during the movie, it jumped back up to these values. Now it's a $30 to $90 book. So again, pretty steady. Slightly, I'll be back on the raw side. 9.8's $2 to $250. They've backed up a little more, but overall, I'm still going to say, like even back then, the raw copy was set. The 9.8s were selling around $300. So we're going to call this steady. I'll be back because of the number of raw sales here, and that it's an I'll be back. You can maybe say down and I'll be back because of the 9.8 values, but we're going to put it in that category. It's definitely backed up a little bit, but not as bad as some of the post-movie books that we've seen recently. And I will say that the thing here is probably because it was already backed up even at the movie from the previous heights. And then our last book of the week is Black Panther #2 from 2005, the first appearance of Shuri. $40 to $100 also back then, $3 to $350 on a 9.8, so right in the same range as that Riri book. Now it's a $20 to $90 book, so again, raw copies have done about the same thing. $2 to $275 on a 9.8. So you could argue maybe I should call this also steady and I'll be back. I called this one down. I don't know. These 2 are both right on that borderline of where you could call steady or down. I gave one of them steady, one of them down. This one did back up a little more on the 9.8 side, but not a lot. Either way, these books are definitely have held pretty well, but they're definitely down and a better time to buy post Black Panther 2. All right, that is this week's list. I want to thank you guys for watching, and we will catch you next time.